the role of Israel in the American race is really interesting because it's always been seen as a Democrat problem, because Trump and Israel are pretty aligned. The question of what it means for the Democrats is a key one. I understand what you're saying, David, that they are going to meet up, but there is a ceremonial aspect to this Congress meeting, and Kamala Harris is not there. I mean, are you worried? Is Netanyahu worried that Kamala Harris is not going to be as staunch an ally to Israel as, say, Biden would be or Trump would be?
So look, for decades and decades and decades, America and Israel have been side by side. It's a bipartisan relationship. It's a relationship based on shared values. You know, we're also a democracy, the only democracy in hundreds of miles in any direction. But it's not only about sharing those values. We've got shared enemies as well. And no matter who wins the race for the White House, that's the same enemy. And that enemy is unfortunately Iran. It's a regime, a fascist-style Islamic fundamentalist regime that is seeking to destroy this country. But we're only a stopgap on the way to the West. They call us the little Satan, but they call the US, and the UK is part of that. They call it the big Satan. So no matter who wins the White House, Iran is still an enemy. It's an enemy of I would say, civilization. We're on the front line of them. We're battling against them. Yes, of course, there'll be day-to-day differences of opinion, but at its very base, there is a shared values, and both countries need to win this conflict against Islamic fundamentalism.
And how close to this conflict coming to an end do you feel we are? Are we close to a deal for hostages? And presumably there is this fear in Israel that the longer this takes, the fewer hostages will be alive to get out.
Well, first things first, it's important to remember that it's Hamas which is holding the hostages, not Israel. You know, it's Hamas which burst through our borders with their invasion on the 7th of October and raped and did the most awful things. This country is under trauma. They took about 251 of our hostages. There's 120 remaining. 46 have been killed. That's true, unfortunately. But with the rest, we hope, are alive. And it's one of the key war aims of this country is to get these people home. Everything we are doing in this war against this genocidal, maniac terrorist army is to bring our people home. It's at the front of our faces and the front of our eyes every single day. And for that reason, the Prime Minister took not only people that have been released from Hamas, or that Israel has secured their release through daring military rescues, but also the families of hostages themselves. You know, it's been over 290 days that these poor people have not seen or heard anything from their poor loved ones. You know, not one visit from the Red Cross. We know that they are being held under appalling conditions. Everything we are doing is to bring these people home. Ultimately, this war could be ended this afternoon before you have your lunch if Hamas would lay down their weapons and bring back our hostages. This war will be over immediately.
The International Court of Justice ruled on Friday that the Israeli occupation was illegal. If we're ever going to see peace in this area, David, the question, I suppose, must be, you're going to have to acknowledge this, aren't you? That occupying territory is illegal. It's in breach of the Geneva Convention. That's been recognised by an International Court of Justice. Israel needs to play its part towards peace. And that must mean at some stage recognising that some of its occupation is illegal and pulling back from it.
So it's in our very DNA to search for peace. Israel will always put its hand out to peace. First and foremost, but whenever we have put our hand out to peace, all we've got is rockets, suicide bombs, stabbings, car rammings at bus stops. That's the reply that we've had to peace. Look, the ICJ ruling is unfortunate. It's unfortunate for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it says that, you know, the Western Wall, the second holiest site to Judaism, is in occupied land. I mean, none of us here in Israel, from right to left, all of the 9 or 10 million people can accept that the Western Wall and the Temple Mount, where the Solomon's Temple stood, is occupied land. That's just ridiculous. Look, the ICJ is unfortunately, and it is the highest court of the land, but it's also the court of the United Nations, and the United Nations has, you know, issued more condemnations against Israel, this tiny country, than any other country.
So you think the court's biased? The court's biased against Israel?
It's not for me to judge whether the court is biased, but it's an extension of the United Nations. Its member states send the judges. They have a clear.
Do you think the United Nations is biased? Maybe you could say that.
Well, of course it is. Heavens above. I mean, I think you don't even need to be pro-Israel to say that. I mean, it's an organization which it issues more condemnations against this country more than against any other country. So that's got to be biased. And, we need a situation where the United Nations is reformed, and UNRWA in particular, which is supposed to be looking after the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, it's become a front for Hamas.
And Britain's resumed funding for it. Britain's resumed funding for it now.
And we do think that that's a mistake, and I think it's a mistake which Britain will come to realize, because it's hard-earned British taxpayers' money going to fund an organization with very close links with a terrorist organization. Not only money laundering, but also UNRWA employees taking part in the October 7th massacre. We do need to solve the issue of how we get a better life for Palestinians. That's absolutely the right thing to do, but UNRWA, unfortunately, is beyond saving.
But I guess the point, though, that Israel is correct. Israel is under siege very often. Is very good at pointing out the sins of people around it, and necessarily so. We all can condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization. We can all condemn the rockets get fired by Hezbollah into the north of Israel. But at some point, does Israel not need to have some humility there? It is a breach of the Geneva Convention to which Israel has signed up to forcibly occupy land in the West Bank. That's been going on for years and years. It's regularly been called illegal by international law. The ICJ has now said again it's illegal. At some point, Israel has to show some humility here and say, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to stop building in the West Bank because it is illegal to do so. Otherwise, we're never going to get any compromise from anyone, are we?
I'm not sure I get your criticism. If your criticism that Israelis aren't humble enough, then I'm not sure how to answer that question.
I'm saying you're regularly told that the building in the West Bank, occupying the West Bank, is illegal. It's a breach of the Geneva Convention. It was said again on Friday, and the response is, well, I don't agree with the laws, the court's biased, the UN's biased. My point is, at some point, Israel's going to have to compromise in these areas, and continually building in an illegal fashion is not compromising. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
So your point is wrong, and I'll tell you why. It's because again and again and again, this country has made painful offers of compromise, including in the West Bank and Gaza. We've made very far-reaching compromises.
But you continue to build in the West Bank, even if you're saying that. You're continuing to build there.
If you think that Jews who are from Judea are going to somehow magically leave their link to Judea, where Jews come from, then you're mistaken. All of us have a responsibility, not only to call on humility, which I think of Israel, which is ridiculous. I think it's a time to call on the Palestinians to come back to negotiations, to come back to talks between our two peoples to try and get a resolution. Israel, even though it suffered the most appalling attack on October the 7th, still to this day, the majority of Palestinians living in the West Bank support Hamas. The Palestinian Authority, in over 9 months now, it has not found one moment in all these 9 months to say that they condemn the attacks of October the 7th. So we're living with some extremely dangerous neighbors. It's all right for you in London to preach to us about being humble. These are this is a suicide army. This is a genocidal terrorist organization which we're facing. We are facing them down, whether you like it or not, whether we're humble or not, because we choose life every single time. We will always battle to defend ourselves. But at the same time, peace, we are ready for peace. This is a country which is desperate for peace. I've got my own son who's about to go into the army. He's 18. You think I want to put him in harm's way? We know that we have no other choice but to be strong in our defense, but always to keep an eye ready for peace if there is a possibility of that being the case.
David Mencer, good to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome.
That's David Mencer, spokesperson for Benjamin Netanyahu.